The name's Bond. James Bond.
It doesn't get much more iconic than James Bond as a character. From the moment that Sean Connery appeared as Ian Fleming's super spy in the 1962 film Dr. No, it was pretty clear that this was going to be a lasting franchise. Not only was Sean Connery charming and appropriately cold-blooded in the role, but add to that Monty Norman's timeless theme, Ursula Andress collecting seashells, gadgets, car chases, an odd yet fascinating villain, and you've got yourself one hell of a recipe for a spy movie. Few franchises have managed to last quite as long as the Bond franchise. It reboots itself constantly, and not just in terms of the actors playing James Bond. The overall style of the movies themselves changes quite a bit every time. The Roger Moore outings were a little more lighthearted, so were the Pierce Brosnan ones, while Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig's runs were a bit darker, with George Lazenby's very brief appearance as James Bond something kind of in between. There's nothing quite like putting on a good Bond movie on a Sunday afternoon and watching it with friends or family. With the Daniel Craig movies, we saw a somewhat different approach to what came before. This James Bond was colder, meaner, and so were the films themselves, while still keeping as much as what we love about the franchise in there as possible. The casting of Craig was controversial at the time with some fans, but Casino Royale put all doubts to rest. As the film presented a fresh take on the character that worked, it turns out pretty well. The film was sinister in parts, mostly thanks to Mads Mikkelsen's excellent villain Le Chiffre, but also very entertaining. It presented an early adventure for the character who is still somewhat learning the ropes of being a licensed to kill 00 agent. Bond falls in love with Evergreen's Vesper Lynd before tragedy strikes, setting things up very nicely for a revenge mission. Then followed Quantum of Solace, which continued 007's rogue journey to uncover those responsible for Vesper's death and take them down once and for all. The movie was not received quite as well as Casino Royale, but in my opinion, it was another strong Bond installment with more of a license to kill kind of vibe, crossed with some Bourne-style fast-paced action and a story smaller in scale. Skyfall, I would say, is the best film in the trilogy thanks to the increasingly intense storyline, Javier Bardem's genuinely creepy villain, and the ingenious emotional third act. After Skyfall, I was excited about Spectre. I liked the idea of going in a new direction with a classic Bond foe like Blofeld, especially in the safe, capable hands of Christoph Waltz. The trailers looked pretty dark and stylish. I was into it. But then I saw the movie. Sure, this was a nice looking flick and it started off really well despite the opening titles, which were snooze. The Day of the Dead sequence in particular was excellent. Léa Seydoux and henchman Hinks, played by Dave Bautista, were good additions. There's good action scenes throughout and the build up to Blofeld was solid. Unfortunately, with the introduction of Blofeld, everything kind of falls apart. Blofeld could have been the best thing in this movie, and annoyingly, because I love Christoph Waltz for that role, he's the worst. This whole thing where he reveals that he was behind every Bond villain so far is so unconvincing. Then he gets insta-owned by James Bond, and then there's this really boring wait until he shows up again, which he does with the lamest plan ever. The plan, of course, backfires instantly and he gets owned again. So bad. What's really annoying about all this though isn't so much the hugely anticlimactic third act, although I did hate it, but the fact that the film tries to jump onto the first few films and continue a story that frankly was over and done with. Now, instead of building on the excellent Skyfall, we're mooching off Casino Royale all over again, and as a result, while the world of Bond is moving forward technically, you just feel like you took like 10 steps back with this whole Blofeld thing. There's 3 ingredients that make up a good Bond movie, or any good action film in general. Number 1, a compelling story. Number 2, exciting action beats. And number 3, a memorable villain. Most Bond movies nail at least 2 of these. Sometimes the olives are missing, sometimes the vermouth is a little too dry, sometimes you're getting cheap vodka. Skyfall and Casino Royale certainly had the whole package, while Quantum of Solace and Spectre almost got there but not quite. Still, there was some flavor there, and you know what, there's still some flavor to No Time to Die. Remember how strong the opening of Spectre was? Well, I would argue No Time to Die does just as well, and it does so without the tracking shot gimmick and with a much better theme. We meet back with James Bond as he enjoys some peace with Madeleine in a not so subtle nod to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which, it turns out, is this movie's main source of inspiration. To the point where you hear both Louis Armstrong's classic song We Have All the Time in the World and the movie's original theme several times. Of course, things quickly turn to shit as Bond is made to suspect Madeleine to have been working with Blofeld the entire time. Blofeld, who is, at this point, safely behind bars. This is a very strong start to the film as you really feel the drama of it all. The intensity of the well-executed car chases combined with a perfect relationship suddenly breaking down due to a possible betrayal. You see the cold-hearted Bond resurface and you feel for him because you know he hates all of this and has his own trauma with Vesper to blame for that. But you also feel for Madeleine, who may or may not have double-crossed him, but appears to be genuinely hurt by all of this. The film settles down post-credits and the plot slowly complicates itself as a new MI6 agent enters the picture, revealed to be the new 007. Then a new villain steps up, Rami Malek's sinister Safin, and Blofeld's master plan comes to fruition. Sort of. There's a cool sequence involving Bond working with Felix Leiter, played once again by Jeffrey Wright, and Ana de Armas' Paloma, a Cuban agent helping the CIA. There's some solid action in the movie, and Christoph Waltz is once again terrific as Blofeld. The sequence where Bond is in a club surrounded by enemies as Blofeld's remote eye watches him is brilliant. Really well done. The scene where Felix dies is not quite as well done, but it has a good dramatic punch, and you look forward to Bond avenging his friend who was betrayed by a colleague of his. I think these two Blofeld movies suffer from the same big problems in their second halves. While there are very good twists and turns early on, the master plan at the heart of it all is rather weak. So by the time you get to the resolution, it's not only underwhelming, but it doesn't really work at all. Skyfall had an ambitious plot with a cunning villain cleverly pulling the strings the whole way through, dragging you and Bond down a strange rabbit hole, and an explosive ending surprisingly small in scale which still packed an emotional punch. In Spectre and No Time to Die, the villains and their master plans just don't cut it, which is a shame because with better writing they could have been fantastic, very easily. The build-up to those endings certainly were. Anyway, what is so bad about the second half of No Time to Die? I mean, it has to be pretty bad to ruin the movie, and I would argue that it is, and it does, but let's talk about this. After Felix dies, James Bond's friend for a very long time, remember, Bond is pissed off, obviously, and he goes off to find the dude responsible who is also putting his own family in peril. We'll get to that. It's an important character in the Bond universe. If you remember, in License to Kill, his death was the catalyst for the whole movie to even take place. So the resolution to this part of the story needs to have a lot of meat to it. Bond facing off with his friend's killer, in my opinion, needed to be an essential part of the ending. A fight for the second half of the movie to build up to, so we, the audience, can look forward to the enemy's inevitable demise. There's a long sequence in the forest where Bond and his family are hiding from the bad guys. There's a car chase, and Bond takes down Felix's killer in 2 seconds, not even in a cool way. This really doesn't make the killing of a major character worthwhile at all from a dramatic standpoint. It just falls flat. Now, I mentioned Bond's family earlier, and that's because this movie sees Madeleine reveal that she had a child with James Bond. I'm not wild about that idea myself. I think it takes focus away from Madeleine, whose character arc was a massive deal early in the movie, especially since she has a close connection to both villains in the movie. And again, the way her character arc goes falls flat because the kid kinda takes over in the second half. And did we really need Bond to have more at stake here? The answer is yes and no. No, because the film already had plenty of drama to work with, but yes, if you are going for the ending they went with, which I would say was not worth going with. I won't go into a crazy amount of detail, but the way it goes is everyone, including Nomi, Lashana Lynch's 007 agent who gives the iconic number back to Bond at this point, everyone goes to Safin's secret lair off an island where he's growing all these poisons and nanobots, DNA targeted missiles, all sorts of crazy shit. As Bond sneaks in with his fancy MI6 boat, Safin manages to get his hands on Bond's daughter. What follows is a mostly muddled mess where the main villain is mostly forgotten. Bond kills like 100 people, which is cool, admittedly, it's a good scene. And M tells Bond that time is of the essence as the island is about to go bye-bye anytime. Safin, who, like I said, had his hands on Bond's daughter, just lets her go for no reason, and he leaves. But later, it turns out he didn't leave at all. He was still on the island, which makes no sense. The point of the Bond movies being this ongoing serial type of thing where this larger-than-life character takes on evil weirdos and the action is non-stop. We care about and like the character, but we know he won't die because part of the fun is seeing him escape ridiculously perilous situations. Like with Felix's death, the resolution here falls very flat. But why is that? Surely our beloved super spy dying should be traumatic. Again, because none of it feels earned, because this daughter was sprung on us and Bond halfway through the movie, because we've seen Bond take on much cleverer villains than this, because we've seen Bond escape much crazier situations than this. In this movie even, Bond ends up being poisoned by Safin, and because it's basically a DNA nanobot poison, he would never be able to be with his daughter anyway. I love that they made a point to show us that Bond has this kick-ass spy boat, he's got another super spy helping him, and he still can't figure this shit out. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy it. Fine, maybe Bond can't be with his daughter ever, but he can still live a solitary life somewhere. He's used to it anyway. For all the crap it gets, Quantum of Solace remains a far superior film to these last two installments. Granted, Spectre and No Time to Die have some excellent sequences, more impressive sequences than anything in Quantum of Solace, but the latter took a smaller scale story and it made the most of it. Dominic Green is not your typical over-the-top villain like Blofeld or Safin. He's just kind of a slimy French dude, a shady entrepreneur with some powerful friends. But the fact that he is so normal makes him an interesting foe for Bond to take on, and the way in which he is handled in the film is very, very good. He is intimidating in his own way. You can tell how much of a scumbag this guy is through the way he speaks, controls people, and his cruel actions. He would 100% get demolished by James Bond in a one-on-one fight, but he still definitely presents him with a challenge, and his fate in the film is beautifully handled. All this to say, the Bond movies should never be afraid to tell a smaller Bond story, or a big story spread out over a couple of movies with varying levels of scale. This is why the Daniel Craig trilogy was so strong. The following films tried much too hard to give the Bond character an epic, life-threatening challenge and make the villains puppet masters who somehow were behind everything that ever happened in the previous movies. In the process, the writers lost track of how to actually make that work. Blofeld's plan was easily defeatable for Bond at the end when the man was built up as being this evil genius. Safin's plan was much better and does sort of partly work out at the end, but his own sacrifice just felt irrational. Much was said about Lashana Lynch taking on the 007 title, but the film really doesn't do anything worthwhile with that idea. Talk about people losing their minds over nothing. Ultimately, this character never feels all that essential, which is why having her work with Bond at the very end, or turn out to be a villain, could have been a good solution in my opinion. She returns the 007 number to James Bond by the end, and that's it. She doesn't go to save James Bond, she doesn't kill the bad guy, nothing. Each film delivers some really good action and fantastic individual sequences, great scores, terrific performances and cinematography. Things just got a little clumsy, maybe lazy with those last two movies, which doesn't make them terrible or unwatchable, just big missed opportunities that expose the flaws in this increasingly serious Nolan-esque take on the character of James Bond. Where will the franchise go from here? I have no idea.